آتورای مغبش لامال خون ناره بن بابن بتمن برز خزبت آتورای تأديم البت فاتوخن أدي تلخ أرخ راب السوجل رابا نقيتل خرزت أدي شميتنا أنا بخشابن خرز رابا مليا رابا مرشانا رابا أنقايا قد أخنا آها خرزة أهولتت أمتدين قد أدي بتهاجخ بمليوتا عم يقرأ أرخا أنا مدن قاتوخون ويلي يقرأ هانيبال ترافيس بروفيسور قد University International فلوريدا University International مقروية له اتلي نسيانا يلبانا رابا موقع أنا خشفة من قاتوخم بتاننون قد عم يقرأ كمالي بلي أها معلو بلي وريسيرش بعدلي جو intellectual property بت قصة ديزاينت قد بياشنا فيه جو داني شلون معلو بلي وريسيرش بعدلي هر ايضا تزي الى جو انترنت لا انتي تراست لا قد الى انتي تراست نافيتون بدايه الى خا كولكشن الى بالفدرال وغفرمنت قانونايت بوت ريجولر بتت بزنس كوربوريشن إتر هذا انترناشونال لا إتر كتاب بسمن جو كامبريدج يونيفرسيتي بريس رالتريدج كارولاينا أكاديميك بريس رابن أنا بقارن قاتوخن chapter in books published by Cambridge University Press إتر سانتا كلارا لا ريفيو American IP Law Association حتى بيش جو كل مدينات أمريكا أني جوري جو يونيفرسيتي آها همزم زملة لكتشر يوبلي وفيش الطليبة قد قاتي همزم عم يقرأ بداية نسيانا اتلي إقارة قاتو قد تقسطت آتورايت أديوم بقشيطة بالخين بليخلي وعديزة بالخانلي إتمساسة يبيتون أنا بياين عادية قارن البرس خزفة Mr. Travis, this is Noré again. I hope you're doing well. It's nice to have you here.
I'm well, thank you. Good afternoon.
How is everything with you with coronavirus and a university?
We are blessed. Our university is still open. We've been teaching classes remotely. We're making plans for the fall. There could be classes taught a few different ways. Considerations and meetings are still underway, but the people I know are blessed to still be employed and to have their health, and my mother still has her health, so I'm thankful for all that.
Great. Hope everybody is safe. I want to ask with my first question. Today we have a full hour, actually 50 minutes, and I do have some important question, just Assyrian subjects. My first question may be, Mr. Travis, Assyrians do not have social equality in their own homeland. What could be the reason? Do you know why? What is the reason?
Sure. Well, there are reasons in recent times and reasons in further decades in the past and centuries ago. So, of course, centuries ago, many cities were destroyed, empires and states fell, churches were persecuted, people had to flee their homes with only their clothes, or sometimes not even their clothes. And it led to a situation of inherited poverty and trauma for many communities. More recently, of course, there was the nation-building process of the 20th century, the breakup of many empires, the principle of self-determination, and the race for resources and territory. And of course, Assyrians and Chaldeans came up on to some extent, on the losing end of the self-determination process. Their proposals for an Assyro-Chaldea or an Assyro-Chaldee in Upper Mesopotamia, Northern Iraq, Southern Turkey, Eastern Syria were rejected. Northwestern Persia was also to be included. That was rejected. Also, the proposal for a Kurdistan that would have an Assyrian role was rejected. possibilities of socialist government that would have had more equality among the religions were quashed. And of course, we saw the rise of ultra nationalism around the world, but notably in Turkey, then in Iraq and Syria, and in Persia, and then the rise of radical fundamentalism and an increase in both state to state war and non state to state war or rebellion. And that's resulted in, you know, many deaths and mass refugee flight. And of course, the Assyrians of Nineveh Plains, Kabul region, Tur Abdin, Hakkari have been among the worst affected proportionally, and their numbers have been among the most absolutely reduced.
Well, Mr. Travis, when I was representing SAFO, I was sent by University of Columbia to Bonn, Germany, and it was a 4 or 5 days workshop, and there were many people from the different countries, and they were representing their countries. Of course, Assyrian, they don't have a country, so I was lucky to represent Assyrian in that gathering. However, some of us they made a presentation, and I was one of them. When I finished my presentation, I was told that the reason that Assyrian has been going through all these atrocities, all these killing throughout the centuries is because they became Christian, and Christianity is the reason that we are not prospering in that land. So if we are trying to get our land back, or we as indigenous people of that land, we should have some rights. And unfortunately, my second question will become, that's the reason will become, you know, to become a powerful, to let them know why we have to have our homeland back, because economic growth, we are very short of economic growth. How can we build our economic growth?
Right. Well, the two questions are linked in a way because the lack of national rights and of recognition leads to a lack of voice that then contributes to economic underdevelopment and a failure to rebuild cities and buildings that have been destroyed over the years. So, you know, in other examples, um, for example, in Germany after the war and in Israel after the war, it was recognized that genocide had been committed against the Jews and the Poles and maybe some other people. There were transfers of assets from Germans to Jews and from Germany to Israel directly. And as a result, Israel had the basic uh, capital to start its growth, and now it has grown to be one of the most successful economies in the world. Not on a per capita basis, not on an absolute size basis, but even in terms of absolute size, its technology industry is large, even in compared to much larger countries, and their technology industry is larger than the industry of some very large countries. So when fast forwarding to the present day, when populations are recognized by the United Nations or by other groups to have been subjected to genocide or aggression or some other international wrong, there are a variety of things that can be done. For example, that were done in Bosnia to ensure that monuments are rebuilt, people can resettle their homes, they have a right to return. There are changes in the laws to prohibit hatred or incitement against them, to protect them, to give them maybe an automatic role in the government or something like that, some kind of self-determination or a quota system. And a few of those things have been done. For example, in Iraq, um, in recent years in Turkey, there hasn't been a quota system, but there's been more inclusion of Assyrians within the parliament and the city councils and the mayorships and so forth. That process has been reversed, since 2016, or it's gone into decline. Um, and of course, in Iran and Syria, uh, the situation is very bad and is probably not going to improve. Um, in Iraq, there is a large budget in the UN Development Program, and the Iraqi government and the KRG and USAID and UK development funds and European development funds to rebuild cities. Supposedly, schools have been rebuilt, other buildings. Sometimes the rebuilding has been called cosmetic, but there are more funds there for that kind of thing than in Syria or Turkey.
Um, you mentioned Israel. They were compensated for genocide happened to them. And I just this subject is very short. We have talked about it quite a lot, but well, Assyrian or Christians in general, Armenian, Assyrian, and Greeks, they can ask for this compensation, and that might help Assyrian with the financial growth that we were talking about. Don't you think so?
It would, and there are lawsuits in the world court uh, of this kind. For example, where Bosnia sued Serbia to for damages over genocide in 1991 to 1995. Georgia sued Russia for racial discrimination and ethnic cleansing they alleged was going on in South Ossetia and Georgia. Um, in Myanmar, there are proceedings with the International Criminal Court. Um, there are other examples like this. The problem is there are many problems. These courts are not 100% independent, where they can abstractly declare a law or a form of justice and order compensation. Um, there is sort of a rotational system where blocks of countries or specific countries have a veto on who becomes a judge. And then the procedures are very formal and difficult to comply with. And there's a lot of exceptions and gaps that you can fall into. Georgia fell into a gap. In a way, Bosnia fell into a gap. Nicaragua, when they brought a lawsuit, they fell into a gap. And those are people who have a country. So Assyrians have the further problem. They don't have a country. Their leaders are divided. They haven't been able to agree since 1918 or maybe before that. So um, multiply all of the difficulties that Bosnia or Rohingya or Georgia have times 100, and then you have the situation of the Assyrians trying to obtain compensation.
Mr. Travis, our educated people, our educated people can make positive changes in Assyrians' life. And, young generations, educated young generations, they have not learned how to run a nation. And when they take over the organization, because of limited training they have regarding running the nation, the policy of their nation, they run it as a family affairs. They're not educated, learned how to run their nation. And these educated young people are very important to our life. Don't you think so?
I don't know about how which organizations you're referring to. In terms of countries, actual states, Um, it cuts both ways, whether age or experience help prevent corruption or help improve governance. I mean, there are some older leaders who do a very bad job, some of the worst jobs in the world, and there are some young leaders who do a good job, some of the best improvements in the world. Um, so I'm not sure there's a clear trend either way. And when it comes to Assyrians, I have even less information.
To lay out a foundation for centuries, we still don't have a solid foundation uh, to work on it. Our leaders, uh, either they're not aggressive enough to lead this nation, or they're incompetent. I'm sorry to say that. Do you agree with that?
Whose leaders? I'm sorry.
The leaders we have in governments, that they represent us in United States, in Iraq, in Iran, and in Europe, in some countries of Europe. Um, they're not aggressive. I don't see aggressiveness with their work towards Assyrians' cause, and some of them even, I think, they're incompetent to take that position. That's my question.
Well, of course, we have to separate the two issues: the leaders of countries and states, and then the leaders of Assyrians who don't have a country. Now, in terms of the leaders of countries, of course, many of their populations believe that they are corrupt or doing a bad job and violating human rights and basically destroying the country or destroying cities. And that cuts across all regions of the world. That belief or that distrust. In terms of Assyrians, a lot of leaders have tried to do the best that they can. They're in a difficult situation where they don't have a state, and they're a very small minority in a much larger state, which already is a very bad position to start off from. Which is why, when the self-determination process begins, or when the United Nations recognizes states, almost every leader of a people tries to say, "Do not make me a small minority in some other state." Uh, it's very common to say, "I would prefer to have my own state than to be a very small minority in my neighbor's state." But that's a situation that Assyrians are in, as well as Kurds and others. Of course, Kurds have much larger numbers, so they have a different situation and much more influence wherever they are. Um, so I'm not sure what can be done at this point, whether if leaders did a better job, whether they would have a better result, because they're already starting off from such a low situation. Uh, that's why many organizations try to help Assyrians obtain refugee status in other countries. Uh, Caritas and the Catholic Church and so forth. Um, and that has saved many people who would have been lost to war and poor governance in the state where they were born.
The problem is, Mr. Travis, in my life, I have seen a lot of organization, a lot of parliament. They try to create a parliament, and they worked very hard on it also, but they were not able to do anything. Actually, it started 1 year, 2 year, then it died. And I see that only reason that the majority of people has lost trust in their leaders, and there's the people that they are trying to create the parliament, and because of they're divided. And I tell you, Saddam Hussein and some other characters still are doing it. Saddam Hussein spent $700,000 in 5 churches in United States, and the reason was to divide us. So he was able to divide us actually, and I can verify that, and he was successful. And the people has lost trust with this gathering, with these leaders, with the parliaments, and I don't see any solution. Do you see any solution? Do you see anything that we can do? Yes.
I mean, ethnic groups and so forth have a virtual parliament, or they call it a parliament in exile or something like that, or a government in exile. It usually doesn't lead to very much unless they have some kind of a geographical base that they actually control and they can grow out from there. Um, in the case of Assyrians, it might, if there was some kind of electoral process to name a leader, it might lead to having a stronger voice in certain international institutions. I know that there are various alliances and federations and councils that try to do this kind of thing, um, organizations. But number one, they're divided by denomination, even though they may share a language and a region of origin, um, which is less common among Kurds or some other peoples, I should say. Um, Secondly, even if they did agree and had this leader, they would still have the problem I spoke about earlier, which they would still be less than 1% of the population in most of these places. So who cares what their voice says? It still wouldn't matter. Uh,
Mm.
so those are the two main problems.
And can it be solved somehow? Do you see any way to be solved?
There are solutions I've talked about in my books where, for example, Native Americans have land restitution and sovereignty, limited sovereignty within another country like the United States or the state of Oklahoma or what have you. Um, does it lead to an ideal outcome? No, because they still have much worse economic development and political power and many other things than the non-native U.S. population. Um, in other countries, they have various federations and guarantees for indigenous peoples and minorities. So, something that I've talked a lot about and others is that having constitutional guarantees that are enforceable, that can be, enforced in litigation, that leads to damages awards and so forth, having um, local autonomy. So that, for example, what happened in 2014 when Assyrians and Yazidis did not have local autonomy, they could not organize their own defense. Their defense was organized supposedly by other people at the provincial level or at the regional level, KRG. Some of those
Yes.
people mismanaged the defense or were not adequate to it, and 90% of people had to flee or they were killed, and supposedly about 50% of people had returned to Nineveh Plains, and um, maybe a similar number of Yazidis. I'm not sure. It might depend on whether you're talking about Sinjar, Sheikhan, or all Nineveh province or what. But many people have not returned. It would be probably unwise for them to return without some kind of um,
Protection.
local protection force that
Yes.
would not repeat the mistakes of the past.
Well, I don't know if you know or not. Recently, I was reading that Shabak has raised their activities and are increasing their presence in Nineveh Plain. And that means that if Assyrian, they would like have their own homeland, which is Nineveh Plain. And Shabak are, are, are increasing there. And they're building there. So the chances are getting much less. For that reason, 5 years ago, Mr. Travis, on this on this television, on this station, you mentioned, I want to show that clip. It's a short clip. If control room can put it on. Control, can you put that clip on, please? In conclusion of your articles, you mentioned that United States and European Parliament suggested Assyrian in Iraq are at risk and they will be disappear in our lifetime. My question to you is, what should Assyrian do not to let this happen?
I don't know what they can do to prevent their disappearance in Iraq. I think it may be too late for that place. I do not think it is safe for people to live there anymore who are not Arabs or Kurds. Uh, Perhaps if people live in Erbil or the other side of Erbil, it might be okay. But any place to the west of Erbil and north of Baghdad or north of um, even Basra is too dangerous, I think, for Christians to live in at this point in time. The time really to pass one of these resolutions was in 2004 when people started speaking of the Assyrian genocide being renewed, people fleeing church bombings. In 2006 or 2007, when Samantha Power, who is now the U.S. ambassador to the UN, spoke of religious genocide in Iraq, people targeting other people based solely upon their religion. Also in 2007, the president of Iraq, Talabani, prime minister of Iraq, al-Maliki, spoke of a genocide carried out, by these insurgents and rebels and foreign fighters. So that was really the time to secure the country, maybe establish Assyrian police forces or integrate them into the Peshmerga or into the Iraqi army or whatever. Now I think it's too late for that. I would support giving Assyrians refugee status in other countries.
Where we are standing now, where are we, Mr. Travis? Is there any hope, you think?
I don't know. Things perhaps have improved since that time. A lot of money has been spent on security. It
Uh,
could improve.
okay, that's a good question. Mr. Travis, we Assyrian, um, I'm not trying to be sensitive, but we have a great civilization and we've been living for many, many, many years. We have gone through many wars and genocides and everything. We still speak and have our language, and and we have our culture and everything. What I'm trying to get at, we don't want uh, to get to people, students in the school see our history. We used to be a history, and we don't exist anymore. What I'm trying to say is, we got to find a way. I have question regarding that, but we don't want to die. We don't want to. We want to exist in this world, and we want to live in this world. We want to have our land back. We want to be peaceful nation, and we got to do something. Time is very limited, and as you said, I respect that quite a lot, but I don't want to give up, uh, and we have to find a way. I would like to suggest, if possible, Mr. Travis, you and some other scholars that you might know, I might mention a couple names, which I do respect quite a lot. Mr. Joseph Jacob, who's a professor in political science in Lyon, and there is another uh, person, his name is Burkak Avikan. He is a Assyrian scholar also. Simo Parpola can be very helpful. He has done rather research Assyrian. And I'm positive that many other scholars to get together and find a solution for existing of Assyrian nation at this moment.
I have been to events with a couple of those people, Professor Yakub and Professor Parpel, I believe. But I mean, the purpose of those events was not really to develop a political program. They were to share, papers and talk about history, basically. Um, but at the Assyrian Policy Conference they've had a couple of times the past 4 years. Um, a variety of papers talk about legal reforms, cultural transmission, building archives of Assyrian writings and heritage. There are already archival projects that people work on in Chicago, in Sweden, um, in California. Uh, the People are teaching the language all over the place. In Chicago, in Arizona, in Sweden, in Germany, in Urmia, in Tur Abdin, in Nineveh Plains, people are teaching Assyrian language, or Sureth, if you want to call it
Australia is
that.
doing very well too.
Sorry,
Uh, uh,
Australia.
Australia is, yeah, Australia is doing very well too. Yes.
And of course, on the internet, people are constantly gathering and publishing archives of history and literature and political activity. So, a lot of people are doing work to see that Assyrian culture survives, and it is surviving. It is at risk due to diaspora status and people learning, like me, other languages, and uh, basically studying within other cultures, and that is not good for the survival of any sort of distinct or ancient uh, sect or ethnic group or nation. Um, but I do see a lot of young people who are insisting that they are not simply whatever nationality where they live, but also Assyrian in ancestry or ethnicity. So I think it's going to continue, but the statistical proportion will certainly be less the more every year goes by. And this is not me speaking. Simo Parpola has said this. He said if Assyrians do not agree across Chaldean Assyrians, Syrian Orthodox, Syrian Catholic, Old Assyrian, if all of them do not agree on one Assyrian name or some kind of a name, then they are going to dissolve and not have a voice, basically. Um, Same as if
One voice.
Kurds said, it's the same as if Kurds said, some of us are mountain Turks and some of us are northern Arabs and some of us are river dwelling Syrians and some of us are mountainous Persians. After a while, they would not be Kurds anymore. Uh, if all they had was the Kurdic language, but no shared history. And that's why groups like Israelis and Armenians, one of the first things they do when they have a country is they build an academy of sciences to standardize their language, standardize their identity, to standardize their history. And of course, Assyrians don't have that except through informal NGOs.
Very important to have one voice. That's true. That's true. Mr. Travis, this coronavirus, we have a lot of refugees around in Middle East, in Turkey, in Lebanon, and probably in Syria for some locations. And this coronavirus can affect that place. And without any help of United Nations or any health associations, this coronavirus can spread immediately, very fast. And if they don't have a facility, it will be very hard on them to survive. Is there anything, or can you name some authorities so Assyrian can work and ask them to get to send help for those people that they're refuge.
I mean, I can't necessarily personally speak to what any NGO is doing on the ground. I don't know. Um, I have never traveled to the region. I have no way of saying. I do see press releases and appeals from Assyrian groups who say, and I have no reason to disbelieve them, that they are helping people on the ground who are threatened with coronavirus, who are living as IDPs or refugees in camps, and they don't have their own sink, or they don't have their own shower, or they don't have a car, so they're basically not able to wash their hands all the time, or even some of the time. They have to wait in line for a limited amount of food. When it gets cold, they may not have enough heat, and these groups are providing aid to these people, and that's one way to help them. Of course, on a bigger level, the international community should be providing the aid. Well, before I get to the international community, we could talk about the governments. The governments, when oil prices were high, and not just the national governments, but the regional governments, sometimes like KRG and so forth, were making hundreds of billions of dollars, and
Mm-hmm.
a lot of it was not, either invested in resettling refugees or rebuilding towns. A lot of it was lost allegedly to corruption. Uh, some of it may have just not been spent, and maybe it's still there, and they should spend it if they can on the people. I've written articles about the human rights standard of using your maximum available resources to advance the right to health and the right to housing and the right to life, basically. Those are the regional governments. Of course, many of them now are almost bankrupt, like Syria, because of Arab Spring and other countries, organizing attacks against them and destroying the country, so which leaves them with very little money. Um, but then there's the international community, which has uh, a lot of
Response.
resources, not unlimited resources, but trillions of dollars of available resources, which Middle Eastern countries don't have. Um, and they could, especially because some of them are partially responsible for people being refugees, make sure that these camps, and that people, number one, do not live in camps, but if they do, that the camps have adequate sanitation, water, uh, distance, and so forth, which is not simply to help the people in the camp, but it'll help the rest of the world too, by limiting a second, third, fourth, fifth wave of coronavirus.
Well, there should be a way uh, to find the people, the sources, to make sure that they get enough medicines, nurses, and doctors, and because they don't have a voice, Mr. Travis. They're living in a very hard time. They're having, as you said, not enough everything like me and you have. However, Mr. Travis, um, our time is running out. I would just want to mention something. It's my responsibility, your responsibility, all Assyrians' responsibility to come up with a solution to bring us together. We are divided. For sure, we are divided. To bring us together, we have to work on it. And I would suggest, if possible, I don't know how much time you have, if you can contact scholars that you know of, maybe we can meet within 2 or 3 or a month from now, see if we can come up with some kind of solution or some kind of idea or some kind of resolution that we can present it to our Assyrian all over the world. This is it if we want to stay alive, if we want to exist in this world. Otherwise, will be history. And I would like, please let me know if I can be any help. Send me names, email me whatever you think I can do, I will be very happy to do it. I have plenty time on my hand and I'm willing to do it. But I want you to take that responsibility, the leadership of this responsibility, if you do have time, of course, to see if we can come up with some kind of resolution or solution.
I believe that there have been a variety of proposals for such a solution that have already been published, and the issue is, does the population agree with them? It's not that scholars have not proposed solutions; it's that maybe either Assyrians or other populations just don't catch on, don't endorse the idea, and it doesn't go anywhere.
So if you need any help, if you think I can help, let me know. And since I'm running out of the time, do you have any last word to give to our audience?
Oh, thank you for listening, those of you who are watching the show today, and stay safe, everyone. I wish you well.
Thank you, Mr. Travis. In the meantime, I would like to have you back within 3 or 4 weeks, if possible, to continue on this subject, which I'm very, very concerned about our existence. I'm going to do some study on myself. I'm going to have some ideas. I will email it to you, and if you agree with that, or if you want to have another sitting together within 3 weeks or a month, I would appreciate that. Just you let me know.
We'll be in touch. Thanks.
Mr. Travis, thank you very much. You were with us. I just want to introduce this book of yours that Mr. Travis has written, The Assyrian Genocide, written by Professor Hannibal Travis. I'm going to say it in Assyrian, if you permit me. جشكان مغبة خاي قاربة عم يقرأتي لمنن خليفة خجميرة برسوبلة قد ادمجت جاري كارو خمخلة جاري من نسيانو هيرت شكلخ أنا بطلاب بن رابز مغوب بن مين مدري إنا بتبلخخ موي دال خزاخمو موي لسباي كدا تاتوريتا بداها The Assyrian Genocide يقرأ هانيبال ترافيس كتكتيبه له بسمع لوخون اللت لوخون زون لقريم له خا مهججانا مندي بكام سابقاتو بكل داين قد رابط بالخيبليخ قصة آتوراي وعديزة بالخانة له إنا ممكن آيخا هايرت روخانايت قاتو قد مش رابع از البارو أبيتون راب باسين من أكتاوى زونيتون Mr. Travers, it was an honor having you here. I hope that we can do this within 3 or a month from now. Thank you so much.
Thanks again. Be well.
Thank you.